let me introduce you shortly to the panel. I think we had some very interesting talks. Actually, it was kind of what I hoped that was going to happen today. So I think we had a couple of perspectives on of the problems which sustainable society will definitely focus on the coming few years. One of the things I've been struggling with a lot the last year since I took over the position is where shall we go? So, and there are all kinds of things you can look at. So you can look at, for instance, international examples. There are questions around where the resources for scientific research are coming from, but also some developments within the university. So it's not a real panel which that we have here. So I don't have like a hypothesis or a statement which will be discussed, but I think at this particular point in time for the development of sustainable society, I think these three different issues are relevant to have at least some thoughts about. So I asked the three presenters, which are Will, Kees, Aarts and Garretsen, to prepare a little bit of a statement about a question I will ask them in a minute. They will respond to each other, but you can definitely also ask questions. So I think the interactive part is increasing now. So thank you very much about this. Okay. Will, can we see you already or not? Maybe
I think
no, we can't see you at the moment. But let me just start. So I would like to start first with Will Steffen. We have seen him before today. I think what's interesting about Will also is that he has been involved in the establishment of the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is a big center in Sweden, and he can tell us a little bit about what happened there the last, I think, 10 years, Will. Well, you can tell that to us, how it evolved and what you expect to happen in the near future there, and maybe as an example for what we might try to accomplish in Groningen in the long run, I have to say. Yes, Will.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Yeah, I think the Stockholm Resilience Center is quite a unique academic institution because it started completely outside the framework of disciplines. So it was organized around two things, conceptual approaches and questions. So it was oriented around resilience thinking, social ecological systems, and so on. So it brought together people who had been trained in various disciplines, but they all had one common characteristic. They wanted to tackle large, complex problems that were well beyond their own discipline, but to do so in a way that had a framework, complexity thinking, social ecological systems, and so on. They really benefited because in the Swedish system, they had a very secure, very large 10-year grant. And I think to start a system as innovative as the SRC, they needed that because it does take time to build up the expertise to tackle these big questions. It takes time for people who are trained in different disciplines to learn to use their knowledge, but to jump out of their disciplinary thinking and to start developing new ways of thinking around the questions and around the systems they're studying. So that was really, I think, the secret there. They actually started outside of Stockholm University. They were brought in later. And I remember talking to some of my colleagues at the SRC saying that it took Stockholm University a while to understand exactly what the SRC was and how they operated. But just in summary, I think they're a very unique institution because they are problem-oriented. They use systems approaches. You'll never hear them talk about disciplines when you're working with them. They're always talking about how we're going to tackle this question, what sort of knowledge systems do we need, who can we collaborate with, and so on. So I think it's a model for how we're going to tackle the big complex problems that we've just talked about in the last hour and a half.
Okay, thank you very much, Will. So we have a very nice example here. So when did you start exactly, Will, with the Stockholm Resilience Center?
I think the SRC got started around 2007 or 2008. It's just celebrated its 10th anniversary a couple of years ago. And I had been working in Stockholm with the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, so I knew a lot of the people who came together to form it. But I guess the other point I will just quickly say is that they had a number of senior people who were really interested in tackling these contemporary transdisciplinary problems in new ways. So that was one of the keys to their success, is that these senior people were able to organize a lot of funding for a long period of time.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is a very big center in Stockholm. Is there a question? If one of you have a question for Will to how they organized it or something?
Well,
Harry Garretsen, by the way.
I was kind of triggered by so I'm an economist, so whenever money is mentioned, so the grant they got initially, was it like for how long was it? Because so how long do you think it takes, or on a non-financial basis, to get this off the ground? So what's a reasonable time? Should it take 5 years, or what's reasonable?
Their grant was a very large one, and it was for 10 years.
10 years, okay.
So, yeah, so what they did was they actually extended it to 12. They took the same sum of money and just distributed it over 12 years because they weren't going to use a lot of it to begin with. They were going to build up. But I think a 10-year time frame is good because it means that you don't have to spend you don't have to have a 3-year time horizon where you work for a year and a half and then you start looking for money again. That really, you cannot do that if you want to establish a new, quite different institution. So I would argue you need to have a system like the Mistra Foundation in Sweden, which actually does give large grants for long periods of time for very innovative ideas.
Thank you, Will. Is there a question from the audience about this, what happened in Sweden? Yes, there's somebody with a question. So maybe before the question comes, so Will, there was no teaching in the beginning, right, in this center? It was really outside of the university.
Yeah, so it did run some lecture series, both within the university and for the outside public. But about halfway through that 10-year period, they became officially associated with Stockholm University. They took on masters and PhD students. They do run some courses and so on. But they've been absolutely true to their original aim, which is to stay highly transdisciplinary, to be problem-oriented, to work on some of these very big, tricky issues that are facing the world, a lot of them aspects of sustainability.
Okay, thank you. Question from the audience.
No, actually, you just asked my question.
Oh, okay. Okay, then thank you very much about that. Kees, you have a question to Will, or is that
Not
something?
directly, I think.
Not directly? Kees will come back to that later, Will. So, okay, thank you. So this is kind of what I was thinking about, and I've been looking around internationally. So I think there are only a few of these centers in the world. So there's the Earth Institute in Colombia, there's the Stockholm Resilience Center, and there's the Potsdam Institute for Climate. I'm looking at Will now, I have to admit, but I think
Climate impact research.
yeah, this is where Johan Rockström went, who was one of the persons who also established the Stockholm Resilience Center. So, okay, thank you for that. Now, so this is, I think, one of the things we have to think about. Where do we want to go with sustainable society? What you can see here is, that, of course, that they started outside of the university with big grants and then moved a little bit inside university. I think one of the challenges for us will be to start inside the university, not that we want to move outside university. Let me be clear about this. But I think this will also develop some special challenges for us in the coming few years, but I'm sure we get somewhere. So, okay, let me introduce now the other two members of the panel. So we have Harry Garretsen, who used to be the Dean of Faculty of Economics and Business, and is now in the board of the NWO, which is the Dutch Research Council, exactly. So Harry can tell us in a minute a little bit about the developments that are happening at this point in the Dutch Research Council. And we have Kees Aarts, who is the Dean of the Social Science, Behavioral and Social Science Faculty of Behavior and Social Sciences, and can tell a little bit about what's happening at this point in the different policy segments within the university, considering that we are developing a new strategy for the coming 5 years, which apparently is not enough if I'm looking at Will at this point, but we take it from there, I would say. Okay, Harry, can you tell a little bit more about what's happening with NWO and how this might relate to a sustainable society? So
Yes, that's why you invited me, right? So
yes, exactly.
Well, I have to be brief. So I think there are a number of developments which are relevant for an initiative like Sustainable Society and how it might profit from. So this is more like the external view, right?
Yeah.
So as background, so the Dutch government has signed a treaty with also with the Dutch Research Council, but also with other institutions back in April, which has led to the so-called kennis-investeringsagenda, the knowledge and investment agenda, if you want to translate it into English, which is for the next few years the big new research program for 100 million plus euros. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, you had a couple of slides, right?
I also had slide, but I can do without.
He does it without the slides.
So it's more quicker if I do it without slides.
Whatever.
So that's the background. So and this is just starting now. So the calls for these under this new program, these will be starting to go in autumn, and then for the next 3-4 years. And there are a number of relevant issues. One is the themes. So if you look at the theme, I don't know them all by heart, but about 7 of them, and many of them have this have clearly linked to sustainable society. So either directly because it's energy transition, or sustainable agriculture, or whatever. So I think in all 7 themes there's at least a more than a hint, or even a strong link to the theme of sustainable society. So I think that's good to start. The other thing is that I think the Dutch Research Council, but also the Dutch government, has finally recognized that in these big programs, which are often consortia between research groups from universities, but also private or other public institutions, the social sciences and humanities, and I think many people, or most people probably are from social sciences and humanities, often have a hard time getting a firm place at the table, so to say, right? So these are, without insulting anyone, these are typically programs which have been dominated, at least in the Netherlands, but also on the European level, by medical sciences and physics, and of course they're very important and big, but etc. So we thought at the Dutch Research Council, and especially in the board that I'm in, so I'm in the board for the social sciences and humanities, how can we ensure this time around that right from the beginning we ensure a stronger bargaining position for our field. Also because we feel, and thankfully also now the Dutch government, that these are typically questions, if you want to answer them, and also in a way that society benefits, that there's this obvious social sciences and humanities view. So to take one example, you can talk about energy transition, but if you don't study behavior of people, just ask Linda Steg, right? You don't get a long way. So the whole idea that technological innovation, so the innovation and innovation in research that we need for these themes, is very much a combination between technological innovation and social innovation. Sounds obvious to many people maybe, but it was not that obvious for a long time, at least when it came to grants and big money. So the slight optimism we now have is that right from the word go, when it goes through the calls that will be written, the committees that will assess these proposals, and also obviously in the end the people that will get the grants, that we will see more involvement on a mandatory level. So the Dutch Research Council has now said that from this year onwards, grants without a serious social science humanities part in them, like I just mentioned the Linda Steg as an obvious example, will not probably get funded. So that creates a huge opportunity, I think, for initiatives like this. It will not be easy because how do you organize this? Because we haven't had this 10-year experience, so we have to start running like from a position where we don't have to start a strong bargaining position. But I'm slightly optimistic that for the next 4 or 5 years there will be far more opportunities for researchers in social science and humanities. So content-wise it's clear, right? If you look at the topics, so we can make a claim, and as of this week there will be a new brochure, first in Dutch unfortunately, but also in English, where the Dutch Research Council has, I think in 10 or 11 categories, has listed type of questions you could think of if you're a social sciences researcher. I think the big challenge in the short run is it's a governance thing, how do we organize ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So some of these other research groups historically have been better organized, so it's also very pragmatic, how do we organize ourselves as a field, so that in the next 2 or 3 years we can make this claim, say yes, we have something to offer, and you have to work with us, right? Our field is very fragmented. I think social sciences and humanities there are over 50, not 15, no 50 faculties alone in the Netherlands.
52.
52. I stand corrected. So a lot. So that already kind of signals that it's a very heterogeneous field, but still there's a clear opportunity now that we should take, I think. So that's about my time's up, I guess. So.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a question for clarification for me. So the calls are for interdisciplinary groups in which social sciences should be represented.
Yeah, or either they already exist or they have to organize themselves. So either you have to try to get in touch with somebody in medical sciences who's very good in healthcare, and in Groningen we kind of already do that, but as an example. But also there's a two-way obligation, right? So people in healthcare or people from medical science say, well, we also now need, otherwise we won't get funded. So I think there's pressure on both sides in a good way that we should come together, I think. But that won't be easy, but there's an opportunity.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's definitely an opportunity. Is there a question from the audience about this these developments? No, I think it's also an invitation to start looking where we can find each other. It's definitely because it's starting soon. I think there are all kinds of reasons why we should start further develop ourselves in that direction. So maybe we can go to the next. Maybe Kees, can you tell something about the developments within the university?
Yeah, I can, but let me first underline what Harry was just arguing. I've been involved in the national initiatives to, get more collaboration in the social sciences and humanities field. I think we've come quite a long way over the past years. There is now much more effort to act as a single actor in these power plays in The Hague and everywhere. But there's also still a long way to go. I know this is, as Harry said, it's important that we talking about the social sciences and humanities again, that we come together and drop off all the modesty or single-mindedness that we sometimes have, and look at each other and see what we can do together. There is a lot of organizing efforts going on right now. I could tell you much more about it, but that's not what you asked me to introduce.
Well, if you think it's relevant, you can take one or two.
We have national councils of deans in the social sciences and humanities. There are 4 large clusters, and together they form the so-called social sciences and humanities Council. That has become a more important actor over the last few years. There's a website which I will communicate one way or another, and there's, I think 100 times more coordination than there was 5 years ago, and I can tell that from my own experience because I've seen it develop over the past 5 years. But let's move to this university, because that's what I was asked to tell a bit about. We are working on a new strategy too. We are in the middle of it, actually. It will be finished, hopefully. The date is changing a bit, but hopefully it will be finished early 2021. Importantly, I think, I've listened to all the presentations this morning, which were really wonderful and gave me a lot of insight in the things that are important behind the sustainable society theme. Important to realize, I think, is that the university itself is, of course, a complex system on a micro scale, perhaps, but it's complex. We have individual researchers, we have groups, faculties, and we have the university as a whole. And when you think of the strategy of the University of Groningen, we are talking about a whole. And the question is basically, well, what should that look like? How can we make such a strategy also, a living thing in people's minds, so that people, can do something with it? I think the past years have shown that strategies can work. It's easy to be very skeptical about words in a nice document with photos, etc. Of course, you can always be skeptical at some point in time, but the past years have shown that strategies can work also in this university. That's because, well, about 6-7 years ago, these societal themes were introduced. And I think on the balance, skipping all kinds of details, they have been quite successful, very successful in bringing people together, in bringing researchers together, securing funding also, external funding, but especially by breaking down the walls that are between the various faculties for which this university, I think, is quite famous. I'm here now for 4 years and I'm now getting used to it. It's really a pillarized type of organization, the University of Groningen. In our current strategic plan, I think the most important phase has been the selections of themes that are to be addressed in the plan as a whole. So I'm not now specifically thinking about societal themes, but I'm also thinking about themes like integrity or how do we organize our business in university. The selections of these captions in the plan is very important, and it's I think good news that already early this year the 3 existing societal themes, including sustainable society, along with health and energy, have been selected again to be included in the plan, together with a new theme which well, is usually referred to as data science, data, things with data, big data, whatever you like. So I think that's the important step 1. The new element in the current plan, and Kees knows much more about this and already addressed it, is that the themes are to become schools. That's a very confusing term because, well, everywhere else I think people think of schools when they think of a school of behavioral science or a school of physics or sciences. At Groningen now, the idea of schools is that these are the connecting, interdisciplinary, cross-faculty themes that will, and that's the new element, do both research, promote interdisciplinary, problem-oriented, problem-driven research, and also provide teaching programs. And in my view, that's an extremely good development, a very lucky choice also, because in the end, teaching is the foundation on which a university is built. It's very interesting to have research institute, but within the walls of the university, the connection with teaching is, I think, essential for its success. That's about where we are now. Those schools will probably be organized not in a building with an address and 100 staff members, but as networks, organized like Sustainable Society now by a small bureau, and then, of course, invent new types of research, new types of teaching. I'll stop because, well, the next point would be, when can we say that such an initiative is successful? I've given it some thought, but I think that's the difficult part, perhaps something that we can come back to now. When can we say that in 4 years from now or 5 years from now, this new strategic view was a good choice, was successful? Of course, we can put the threshold wherever we like. Visibility, a website, yeah, that's not so difficult. But I would like to hear also from you what the criteria for success, whether it's about sustainable society within the University of Groningen, or energy or health, what the criteria of success should be. I'll leave it to that, Kees.
Thank you very much, Kees. So anyone has a... What should be the criteria for success for a theme like sustainable society in 5 or 10 years. I'm looking at Will now again. So Klaus, you have an idea? What are your thoughts on this? Oh wait, we wait for the microphone. Gives you a few seconds, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. Have you? Sorry, shall I hold it? I think that certainly the standard criteria apply in terms of publications, research income, students taught, outreach in terms of media attention one receives. But beyond that, that's a really difficult question. Mm-hmm. I don't know what are your thoughts? What have you thought?
What my thoughts are? I know he's throwing the question back. Yeah, thank you, Klaus. Actually, yeah, this is a difficult question for me as well. No, I think we would do good if the university is known for the theme. Right, so if it's in the right circles in terms of policymakers, funding, but also companies, et cetera, that they know we're doing relevant things, and that has to do with, I think, impact. So that we do fundamental research which directly translates into the policy questions that we can find in the outside world. I think that's where the music should be. And in that respect, and I think we should try to form a couple of research groups on points where we are strong. So, for instance, I think it has already been mentioned by Han, the Sustainable Landscapes group started about a year ago. And that's a combination of people from ecology, spatial sciences, geography. I'm looking at Erik, who is here in the audience. Landscape history, so it's a very different, I would say, a very interdisciplinary group. But there's a lot of potential also, I think, in all kind of, in the region, for instance, about what to do with the landscape. So I think this is also what Han was talking about. And I think you are much stronger if you start to mingle in these policy discussions when you do it together than when you do it on your own. So I would be happy if we have say a couple of these groups on different themes under the umbrella story which I presented in the at first. So that would be good for me. The second thing, and this is also a question, I think Kees might say something about it, Harry maybe also as a former dean, I think let me put it like this, I think it's because we are an old university, we are very faculty and disciplinary driven, to organize these groups in an interdisciplinary way in research-wise is already difficult, but I think it's possible. I'm really struggling with the educational part. So how could we organize educational programs or at least bring all this stuff to our students, considering that we have very strong disciplinary faculty boundaries. So, and I don't have the answer there yet, but I'm sure we are getting there in the coming months or year related to the strategy. Are there any thoughts on that, Kees?
Well, just a reflection. I think on the research part of collaboration, you mentioned, I think rightly, that there is a strong disciplinary faculty-based tradition at this university. I also mentioned something like that, but I'm amazed always by the enthusiasm with which people want to collaborate, come to me, also in my role as a dean, but also in my professional background as a political scientist, people from other faculties who say, well, what are you doing? Can we do something together? Or if an initiative is launched also, people want to work with it. So there is a lot of, positive energy, enthusiasm to work on this. And I think the difficult thing, Kees referred to that also, is how do you organize that enthusiasm into a teaching program? The fact that it is difficult shouldn't stop us, I think.
No, thank you. Harry, do you have thoughts on this as a former dean of FAB?
Or as a human being, yeah.
Or as a human being.
So I think the counterfactual is always difficult, right? So what would have happened without these initiatives? So I think one metric for success is also if good people want to join. So if people either from inside your own university or maybe even better, people from outside with a good research reputation want to join on this platform and say, irrespective, well, it's also about funds in the end. I have a comment on that as well, but I think if they want to join, that's a signal that you're doing something good, right? So that's on the input side. Output is obviously more good publications, impact on policy, and the difficulty with the counterfactual, but okay, you never know, right? But the input side, I think good people want to either, like your landscape example, so apparently there's a kind of this platform that good people can find each other now. They collaborate, mainly from people that are already at Groningen, I think.
Yeah.
But also that also holds for people from outside. So a metric might be 5 years down the line if you clearly see that good researchers in their own right want to take part in whatever you're organizing. And the other thing, obviously, is also coming back to the Stockholm example, and Will is also, well, managing expectations, and it's also how much do we want to invest, right? So I'm not saying that the university should invest way more, because it's also always about opportunity cost, and we're doing a lot of stuff. But if we really want to take it to a next level, it's not just taking advantage of external developments like the one I just, so we might be lucky with that. I think in the coming years, if we play that right as a field, not just in Groningen, but as a field, and I agree with Kees that we are now organizing ourselves in a better way. So I will meet next Monday with people from the council that Kees was referring to. I think that's quite novel. So we're doing it better, also bottom up in engaging more researchers. But I think for Groningen it's also so investment-wise. So maybe we need for 5 years or preferably more. We also need some serious money if we want to take it to 2 levels beyond where we are now. So I think it's also about, well, it boils down to that as well. And I don't know whether that will happen. But if not, then we also have to be realistic about what you can achieve, right? So then we can take this further than we do now. But as long as we have faculties and as long as money's kind of funds are kind of distributed as they now are, for collectively for Dutch universities, but also within universities and the faculties, and you also should be realistic about what you can achieve, I think. Otherwise you promise too much and people get disappointed, and well, you see, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that. So actually, I'm looking at Will. Do you have anything to add to the discussion here?
Yeah, look, there are many good points that have already been made, but there is one point going back to the Stockholm Resilience Center model was the really strong engagement with people outside the universities, in fact, outside the research sector. I'm thinking of a couple of good examples on, for example, the finance sector. The SRC worked very closely with large pension funds in Scandinavia, for example, on steering investment into more sustainable directions. And that was an ongoing long problem for a program for many years. Another example was looking at the overfishing problem globally. Again, this was relationships that were developed over many years with many of the major players in the fishing industry. Again, this took years to develop, but once those connections were made, there was some fantastic research done in collaboration with the users. So that's one thing I think that, in addition to the good ideas which have actually been brought up by Harry and by Kees and others, really, again, you need that 10-year window to build these relationships. But that means that as you do the research, you're already going to get it applied because you're working with the people who are going to apply it. And that really strengthens the center's standing within the university, for example, because you're generating outside income, you're having an impact. The university is seen as being influencing major sectors of society and so on. So that's sort of a long-term goal, and the SRC, again, is a good model there. But again, the key to all this is the long-term support and funding, because it takes a while to build these external relationships.
Okay, thank you very much, Will. So it's almost 12 o'clock, I think. So is there anything else? Just a quick round. Kees, you want to add something to the...
No, I'm happy with this discussion and also with the final comments by Will. I'm always hesitant about whether 5 years perspective is enough or 10 year, but I tend to agree, also based on experience, that you should take the time that is needed to build an institution. That's important here.
Okay, thank you. Harry, anything closing, maybe?
Well, to also reinforce the same point. I think we have this tendency also into thinking policy cycles, and if if something has not proven itself after 3 or 5 years, we kind of tend to move on. Let's make a new plan. So with initiatives like this, and I think that very much echoes what Kees and Will were saying, we should take a longer perspective, or allow ourselves a longer-term perspective than we normally do. So if we do that, that is not a sufficient, but certainly a necessary condition for this to be successful.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe a final question from the audience. Somebody who wants to add something or something? No? Will, you're also all set?
Yep. I'm all
Okay.
set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So a small applause for our little panel. I will finish the final talk. So let me summarize it for today. I think in terms of content, I'm very happy with what happened today. So there are a couple of things I really thought were highlighting for me. It's one of the things I think Will said was about I think it was silver bullet or a buckshot. I think so. A lot of these problems, there's not a real silver bullet. I think this is one of the things we are struggling. Struggling is a negative term. Is one of the things we are looking at within sustainable society is to find the real key thing we are working on. I think we will never find it in all detail. But I think the whole overall story in the direction of sustainable development would be a good one in that respect. We can work on this in a variety of ways. So there are all kinds of different topics where different research groups can work on. But there are also different methodologies, so I don't think we should be very particular about this. So Wanda Jager, for instance, asked here on the screen about the role of complexity theory. I think that would definitely be something we can use very well in this context, but it cannot be the only thing, right? So if there's music in that story, we should definitely further develop on that. The second thing, what Han, I think the importance of the landscapes, I think you brought the whole story for me in a little bit bigger perspective even than what I saw before. We are now working on some issues or some projects here in this whole Taukom story in the Groningen region. So there's a lot of money coming in this direction due to the earthquake problems. And I think there's a lot of important things to do there. So I think we can definitely make a difference there as a university as a whole. So I think we can continue there. And finally, I think in Rieneke's story, I think the whole governance question comes up very clearly. It's one thing to acknowledge that there are planetary boundaries or that things go wrong. The second step is how can we solve this and make quicker and better steps in that respect. So I think that will be important to further develop it.